The small moments people talk about, the ones that flip your life upside down, never felt real to me. Not until it happened. Not standing in my own kitchen, chopping carrots for dinner, did I imagine my life would crack open. The knock that evening was unexpected, and seeing Ethan, my nephew, standing there with that look in his eyes was something else entirely. What followed? Completely off script. It was supposed to be a normal Tuesday. Just me prepping dinner while John, my husband, pulled his usual late hours at the office. Ethan's arrival ripped through that calm. He dropped by unannounced sometimes, but this felt different. The way he hung back in the doorway, watching me, it was unsettling. Before I could even process it, I made a mistake, a slip-up that would redraw the map of my entire existence. I can't explain why I did it. Maybe it was the quiet house, the loneliness that had become a constant hum. Maybe it was the way Ethan looked at me, like he was seeing me for the first time, really seeing me. Or maybe, if I'm brutally honest, it was the jolt of feeling desired, something that had been missing for years. Whatever the cocktail of reasons, I crossed a line that night, and the fallout was 1,000 times worse than anything I could have conceived. This is the story of how my world imploded, how a split second of weakness triggered a cascade of events that spun violently out of control. It's a story paved with betrayal, choked with guilt, and riddled with secrets. Secrets that refuse to stay buried. My name is Sarah. For most of my adult life, I've been defined by labels: wife, mother, homemaker. I met John when I was 25, and we married 2 years later. We settled into a quiet suburb just outside the city, the kind of place where everyone knows your business, but they're too polite or maybe too afraid to actually say anything. John is an engineer, a creature of habit and rock-solid reliability. He's the provider type, makes sure the mortgage is paid, the house is maintained, life runs smoothly. But somewhere along the way, something shifted between us. The easy conversations dried up. Our connection faded into the background hum of daily life, replaced by comfortable but increasingly hollow silences. Our son, Michael, left for college a few years back, and the house has felt cavernous ever since. Without Michael around, the days blur together in a monotonous cycle. I fill my time cooking, tending the small patch of garden in the backyard, volunteering a few hours a week at the local library. It's a peaceful life, on the surface. But peace can be a thin veil for loneliness. That's where Ethan comes in. Ethan is my nephew, John's younger sister Lisa's son. He's 27, just moved back to town after finishing grad school, always been charming, easy to talk to. John and I have always included him in family dinners, holidays, the usual gatherings. But lately, in the last few months, he started dropping by more frequently, usually when John's at work. It was never inappropriate, not overtly. Just casual visits, small talk, maybe helping with a quick household chore. But there was always something else simmering under the surface of our conversations. Something unspoken, but you could feel it. A palpable tension. Looking back now, the warning signs were there, flashing like neon. I should have seen it coming. It started innocently enough. Ethan would swing by after work, claiming he was in the neighborhood and thought he'd say hi. He'd perch on a stool at the kitchen island while I cooked, asking about my day, sharing stories about his new job, sometimes even lending a hand, setting the table, chopping vegetables. It was nice. Nice to have someone to talk to, especially with John working these insane hours. At first, I didn't read anything into it. Ethan had always been close to our family. His visits felt natural, almost comforting. But as the weeks ticked by, I started to notice a subtle shift in our interactions. He'd linger a little longer after dinner. His compliments became more personal, less generic. Sometimes I'd catch him watching me, a look in his eyes I couldn't quite decipher, a look that made me slightly uneasy, yet also strangely thrilling. One evening, I remember it clearly, I was prepping dinner, rosemary chicken, and Ethan was sitting at the island, watching me as I moved around the kitchen. "You look beautiful tonight, Aunt Sarah," he said, his voice softer than usual. I laughed, trying to brush it off, turning back to the cutting board. "Ethan, I'm covered in flour and chicken juice. Glamorous is not exactly the word." "No, really," he insisted, his gaze intense. "You have this grace about you. I don't know, it's something I've always noticed." His words caught me off guard. John hadn't complimented me like that, really complimented me, in years. And hearing it from Ethan, someone so much younger, sent a strange, unexpected jolt through me. I told myself it was nothing, just Ethan being polite, Ethan being Ethan. But something about the way he said it, the intensity in his eyes, it lingered in my mind long after he'd left. The day everything fractured, the day my carefully constructed life began to unravel, was a Thursday. John was at the office late again, buried under some big project. I was in the kitchen, making a simple pasta dish. Ethan showed up unannounced, as he sometimes did. But this time, he looked different. His usual easy smile was gone, replaced by something more intense, something simmering beneath the surface. "I wasn't expecting you tonight," I said, turning away from the stove to face him. "John's not home yet." "I know," he replied, stepping further into the kitchen, closing the distance between us. "I came to see you." There was something in his voice that made my heart skip a beat, and not in a good way. I could feel the air shift, the tension between us tightening like a drawn bowstring. "What do you mean?" I asked, my hands suddenly clumsy as I tried to continue chopping vegetables. Ethan walked toward me, his eyes locked on mine, unwavering. "I've been thinking about you, Aunt Sarah. A lot." I froze, the knife slipping in my fingers and clattering against the countertop. "Ethan, what are you talking about?" He reached out, his hand brushing against my arm, a light touch, but it sent a shiver all the way down my spine. "You know what I mean." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "I can't stop thinking about you. You're all I think about." I should have stopped him right there, pushed him away, told him to leave, but I stood there, rooted to the spot, my mind racing, a chaotic jumble of confusion and something else, my body betraying me, a wave of heat rising in my chest. It had been so long since anyone had looked at me the way Ethan was looking at me now, so long since I had felt desired. Before I could form a coherent thought, Ethan had closed the remaining space between us. His lips were on mine, his hands pulling me close. I kissed him back, my heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat. The thrill of it was overwhelming, intoxicating, drowning out the faint, nagging voice of guilt that whispered in the back of my mind. When it was over, when we finally broke apart, we both just stood there in silence, the reality of what had just happened crashing down around us. I pulled away, my breath shaky, my mind spinning. "This can't happen again," I whispered, my voice trembling, barely audible. "We can't do this." But even as the words left my lips, I knew they were a lie. Something had been set in motion, something I couldn't control. And deep down, a terrifying part of me knew that this was just the beginning. The days that followed were a blur of guilt and confusion. I tried to convince myself that what had happened with Ethan was a fluke, a momentary lapse, a mistake fueled by loneliness, and something else I didn't want to name. I told myself it wouldn't happen again. But the truth was, I couldn't stop thinking about him, couldn't stop replaying that moment in my mind, the way he looked at me, the way his kiss had felt. I couldn't stop thinking about how alive I had felt in that brief, forbidden moment. Ethan didn't make it easy. He continued to stop by, finding flimsy excuses to visit. Every time he did, the tension between us thickened, became almost unbearable. It became harder and harder to resist him, harder to deny the dangerous pull that had taken root between us. I was playing with fire and I knew it, but I seemed incapable of stopping myself from getting burned. John, bless his oblivious heart, remained completely unaware of the seismic shift happening under his roof. He continued his routine of late nights at the office, occasional business trips out of town. Our marriage had become a well-worn path of convenience, a partnership built on years of shared history, but withering passion. He barely noticed the change in me, the way I withdrew, the strained politeness in my voice, the way I flinched away from his touch. But Michael noticed. Our son had come home from college for a weekend, and I could see the concern etched on his face as he watched me. He asked me several times if everything was okay. I brushed him off, offering weak excuses. Tired, stressed, just distracted. But Michael wasn't easily fooled. He'd always been perceptive, intuitive, and I could tell he suspected something was wrong, something deeper than just stress. Then, one evening, Michael and Ethan showed up at the house together, unexpectedly. The air in the living room instantly crackled with palpable tension. Michael's innocent presence that evening forced me to confront the stark reality of what I had done. As he and Ethan sat in the living room laughing and talking, completely oblivious, I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. I couldn't believe how far things had spiraled, how deeply entangled I had become in this web of lies and deceit. Michael had always admired Ethan, looked up to him like an older brother, a cool cousin, a confidant. The thought of my son sitting in the same room with the man I'd betrayed him and John with made my skin crawl. My stomach churned with guilt. I could barely focus on their conversation. All I could think about was the impending disaster, what would happen if Michael found out, if he ever discovered what his mother had done. "Mom, are you okay?" Michael asked, his eyes narrowing as he watched me from across the room. "You've been really quiet." I forced a smile, praying it looked convincing. "I'm fine, sweetie. Just a little tired." Ethan's gaze flickered to me for a split second, a brief, almost imperceptible flicker, before he looked away, focusing back on Michael. He was being careful, I'll give him that. Even though I could feel the invisible thread of tension stretched tight between us, Ethan played it cool, acting as if nothing had changed, as if we were just aunt and nephew, nothing more. But I knew better. As the evening dragged on, each minute an agonizing eternity, I excused myself and retreated to the kitchen, needing space, needing to breathe. My heart pounded in my chest as I leaned against the counter, struggling to catch my breath, struggling to keep it together. What had I done? How had I let things get this far? I was snapped out of my spiraling thoughts by footsteps behind me. I turned to find Ethan standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low, urgent. I shook my head, panic surging through me. "Not here, not now. Michael's in the other room." Ethan stepped closer, closing the gap between us, his voice barely a whisper. "You can't keep ignoring this, Sarah. You can't pretend like nothing happened." I felt my heart racing, my hands trembling. I gripped the countertop for support, knuckles white. "I'm not ignoring it, but we can't do this. It has to stop." His jaw tightened, and for a moment I thought he might argue, might push, might grab me again. But then he took a step back, his eyes dark with frustration, something akin to anger, but also something else, something like hurt. "Fine," he said, his voice clipped cold, "but this isn't over." But before I could respond, before I could even process his words, he turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving me standing there breathless, my mind spinning, my world teetering on the edge of a cliff. I didn't know what to do. The more I tried to pull away, the deeper I seemed to sink into this mess. And deep down, a terrifying voice whispered, I knew Ethan wasn't going to let this go. Not easily. The days that followed were heavy with a growing sense of dread. Ethan continued to show up at the house, unannounced, always finding some flimsy excuse to drop by when John wasn't home. Each time he did, the tension between us grew more unbearable, more suffocating. I could feel myself unraveling, thread by thread, bit by bit. I tried to distract myself with the mundane tasks, cleaning the house until it gleamed, cooking elaborate meals nobody really ate, tending to the garden until my fingers were raw and bleeding. But nothing seemed to quiet the storm that was brewing inside me. I could feel my carefully constructed life, the life I thought I knew, slipping through my fingers like sand, and I didn't know how to stop it. Then, something happened that threw everything into complete chaos. It was a Saturday afternoon. Michael had gone back to college. John was out running errands. I was in the kitchen, making a sandwich for lunch, when I heard a knock at the front door. My heart sank. I knew who it was before I even opened it. Ethan stood on the porch, hands shoved deep in his pockets, expression calm, almost too calm, but I could see the tension coiled beneath the surface, ready to spring. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. I hesitated, glancing behind me to make sure John wasn't back yet. "This isn't a good time, Ethan." "It's never a good time, is it?" Ethan said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "You keep pushing me away, but you don't understand. I'm not going anywhere." I closed the door behind him, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Ethan, you need to leave." I tried to keep my voice firm, but it wavered slightly, betraying my fear. "I can't do this anymore." He moved closer, his voice lowering to a dangerous whisper. "You think you can just walk away from this? From me? It's not that simple, Sarah." I backed away, my hands trembling, trying to create some distance, any distance between us. "You don't understand. I have a family, a husband. This was a mistake." Ethan's expression darkened, and for the first time I saw something in his eyes that truly terrified me. A cold, hard anger. "A mistake?" he repeated, his voice laced with venom. "Is that what you're calling it now? I don't think you realize what's at stake here." Before I could respond, the sound of the front door opening echoed through the house. My blood ran cold. John was home. "Sarah?" John's voice called out from the hallway. "Honey, are you here?" My breath caught in my throat. I turned to Ethan, panic flooding my system. He stood frozen for a split second, his eyes locked on mine, a silent, charged exchange before he quickly stepped back, moving toward the back of the kitchen, toward the back door, a silent retreat. "I'm here!" I called out, trying to force my voice to sound normal, steady. I grabbed a dish towel, wiping my damp hands, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might actually burst out of my chest. John walked into the kitchen, his usual warm smile on his face. "I picked up those things you asked for," he said, placing grocery bags on the counter. "Everything okay?" I forced a smile, nodding, moving to help him unpack the bags, trying to act normal, trying to breathe. "Yeah, everything's fine. Just cleaning up a bit." Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Ethan slip out the back door, disappearing into the backyard, swallowed by the shadows of the trees. Relief washed over me, a wave of pure, unadulterated relief. But it was short-lived. I knew this couldn't go on much longer. The lies were piling up, suffocating me, and sooner or later John would figure out something was terribly wrong. But what terrified me even more was the thought of Ethan. His behavior had become increasingly erratic, unpredictable, and I didn't know what he was capable of. The look in his eyes that afternoon, that fleeting glimpse of something dark and dangerous, it haunted me. I had a sinking feeling that he wasn't going to let me end things, not without a fight. That night, sleep was a distant country I couldn't reach. I lay in bed next to John, his breathing deep and even, lost in oblivious sleep. My mind raced, replaying the events of the day over and over, dissecting every word, every glance, every chilling moment. I knew I had to end things with Ethan, finally, irrevocably, once and for all. But I didn't know how to do it without everything imploding, without my entire life collapsing around me. The next morning, I woke before dawn, a knot of dread twisting in my stomach. But with the dread came a sliver of clarity, a desperate resolve. I made a decision. I was going to meet Ethan. I was going to tell him, face to face, that it was over. For good. I couldn't let this poison continue to seep into every corner of my life. I couldn't risk everything I had built with John, no matter how much guilt, how much reckless desire had clouded my judgment. I texted Ethan a short, clipped message asking him to meet me at the park near the edge of town. A secluded spot. A place where we wouldn't be seen, wouldn't be overheard. The best place, I reasoned, to have this final, devastating conversation. When I arrived, the park was deserted, shrouded in the early morning mist. Ethan was already there, leaning against his car, arms crossed over his chest, a solitary figure in the pale morning light. He looked calm, deceptively so, but I could feel the tension radiating off him, see it in the rigid set of his shoulders, the way his eyes followed my every move as I approached. "We need to talk," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, even, despite the tremor that ran through me. Ethan didn't respond immediately. He just watched me, his expression unreadable, a mask of carefully constructed composure. "This has to end," I continued, my voice shaking slightly now, the carefully constructed composure cracking. "I can't do this anymore. I'm married, Ethan. I have a family. This was a mistake, a terrible mistake, and it needs to stop." For a long, agonizing moment, Ethan said nothing. Then, he pushed himself off the car, straightened up, and stepped closer, his voice low, controlled, but laced with an undercurrent of something dangerous. "You don't get to decide that, Sarah. This isn't just about you." My stomach tightened with a sudden sharp fear. "What are you talking about?" He took another step toward me, his eyes darkening, the carefully constructed composure finally crumbling. "I'm not going to let you just walk away. You think you can use me and then toss me aside like I'm nothing? I never meant to." I started to protest, but Ethan cut me off, his voice rising, the controlled calm shattering. "You don't get it, do you, Sarah?" He stepped closer, too close, his voice trembling, raw with emotion. "This isn't over. It's never been over." His words hung in the air, heavy, menacing, like a physical threat. A cold shiver ran down my spine. This was worse than I had imagined. Ethan wasn't just upset, he was angry, possessive, and I could see with terrifying clarity that I had drastically underestimated how deeply he had become attached, how far this had gone in his mind. "I'm not trying to hurt you, Ethan," I said, trying to stay calm, to reason with him, to diffuse the volatile situation. "But I can't keep doing this. I love my husband." Ethan's expression twisted into something between a sneer and a hollow, broken laugh. "Your husband? Where was he when you were kissing me? Where was he when you invited me into your bed?" I flinched at his words, the crude intimacy of them, guilt and shame washing over me in a sickening wave. "Please, Ethan, let this go," I pleaded, my voice breaking. "You have your whole life ahead of you. You don't need me." "I don't need you?" Ethan stepped even closer, his voice shaking with a mixture of anger and a desperate, unsettling vulnerability. "You're the only thing I think about. You're the only one who's ever made me feel like I matter." I took a step back, fear clawing at my insides. This wasn't the Ethan I knew. This was someone unrecognizable, someone dangerous. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice cracking, tears welling in my eyes. "But it has to end." Before I could say another word, Ethan grabbed my wrist, his grip tight, unyielding, bruising. "You don't get to walk away from me, Sarah. Not like this." Panic surged through me, a tidal wave of ice-cold terror. I pulled my arm free, stumbling backward, away from him, desperation giving me strength. "Ethan, stop, please!" For a moment, he hesitated, his face contorted with a volatile mix of anger and confusion. Then, without another word, he turned abruptly, stormed off toward his car, slammed the door with brutal force, and sped away, tires spitting gravel, leaving me standing alone in the deserted park, trembling, exposed, utterly terrified. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, the chill morning air biting at my skin, my body shaking uncontrollably, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I knew this wasn't the end. Ethan wasn't going to let this go, not after that look in his eyes. The days that followed were a nightmare. Ethan didn't try to contact me again, not directly, but his sudden, unsettling absence only amplified my anxiety. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, that Ethan was planning something dark. The fear gnawed at me day and night, a constant, relentless pressure. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, jumping at every unexpected sound, every ringing phone, every knock at the door. Then, one evening, the inevitable confrontation with John finally arrived. I had been so consumed with guilt and fear, so preoccupied with Ethan, that I hadn't noticed the subtle shifts in John's behavior, the way he watched me, the increasingly pointed questions, the veiled accusations disguised as concern. But now, standing in the kitchen, bathed in the harsh fluorescent light, his expression hard, unreadable, I knew. He had figured something out. "Sarah," he said, his voice cold, flat, devoid of warmth, "we need to talk." My blood ran cold. "Sarah," John repeated, his voice firmer this time, his eyes never leaving mine, piercing me with their intensity. "We need to talk." I stood frozen in the middle of the kitchen, the sound of my own heartbeat echoing in my ears, a frantic drumbeat against the suffocating silence. This was it, the moment of reckoning. He knew, or at the very least he suspected, and the suspicion was enough. I could feel the weight of his gaze on me, the way his eyes searched my face, desperate for answers I was terrified to give. "What's going on with you?" he asked, stepping closer, closing the distance, the space between us suddenly shrinking, suffocating. "You've been acting strange, Sarah, for weeks now. You're distant, distracted, like you're a million miles away. You're not yourself." I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry, cottony. I had no idea how to respond, no script prepared for this devastating moment. The truth was right there, on the tip of my tongue, a poisonous confession, ready to spill out, to contaminate everything. But I couldn't bring myself to say it, to utter the words that would shatter our life, shatter John. The thought of confessing everything, about Ethan, about the affair, about the betrayal, made me physically sick. I don't know what you're talking about," I stammered, my voice barely a whisper, a pathetic, transparent lie. John's eyes narrowed, and for a fleeting moment, I thought he might explode, might unleash the fury I knew was simmering beneath the surface. But instead, he took a deep, shuddering breath and ran a weary hand through his graying hair, clearly frustrated, but still trying to maintain a semblance of control. "Don't lie to me, Sarah," he said, his voice calm, but steel-edged, stern. "I know something is going on. You're hiding something from me." Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, hot and stinging. I turned away, unable to meet his gaze, unable to face the raw pain I knew was reflected there. How could I explain what I had done? How could I tell him that I had betrayed him, betrayed our marriage with Ethan, his own nephew, the nephew he had practically helped raise? The thought of it was unbearable, a physical weight crushing my chest. "I've just been stressed," I lied again, forcing myself to keep my voice steady, to project some semblance of normalcy, some pathetic attempt at denial. "You know, with Michael away at school and everything." John watched me for a long, agonizing moment, his gaze unwavering, dissecting my pathetic attempt at deception. I could see the doubt swirling in his eyes, the disbelief, the dawning realization. He didn't believe me, not completely, but he didn't push further, not yet. Stressed? He repeated, the word hanging in the air between us, heavy with unspoken accusation, as if testing the flimsy excuse, seeing if it would hold up under the weight of reality. Is that really all this is, Sarah? I nodded, a small, jerky movement, trying desperately to keep my emotions in check, to maintain the crumbling facade. Yes, I'm sorry, John. If I've been distant, I didn't mean to worry you. For a long moment, he said nothing, just stood there, watching me, his expression a complex mixture of concern, suspicion, and a deep, underlying sadness. Then, finally, he sighed, a long, weary exhale, and turned toward the counter, picking up the grocery bags he had brought home, the mundane act a stark contrast to the emotional chasm opening up between us. All right, he said quietly, his voice flat, resigned. But if something is bothering you, Sarah, I'm here. We can talk about it. I nodded again, another small, jerky movement, my heart heavy with a crushing weight of guilt. I wanted to tell him the truth, to confess everything, to come clean and finally face the devastating consequences of my actions. But the fear of losing him, the fear of losing everything, the life we had built, however fractured, however imperfect, kept my mouth clamped shut, the poisonous secret festering inside. As John began unpacking the groceries, the mundane sounds of rustling plastic and clanking cans filling the strained silence of the kitchen, I excused myself, muttering something about needing to use the bathroom. I retreated to the small powder room off the hallway, locking the door behind me with a soft click, a futile attempt to shut out the reality closing in. As soon as I was alone, enveloped by the sterile quiet of the small room, I leaned against the cool porcelain of the sink, my hands gripping the edge of the counter, knuckles white again, and stared at my reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back at me was a stranger, hollow-eyed, pale, etched with lines of worry and guilt I hadn't noticed before. What had I become? How had I let things get this far? I knew, with a terrifying certainty, that the longer I kept this secret buried, the worse it would be, the more catastrophic the eventual explosion when the truth finally surfaced. And I had no doubt, none whatsoever, that the truth would come out. Ethan wasn't going to let this go, and it was only a matter of time, a terrifyingly short amount of time, before everything came crashing down. It wasn't long after that strained, suffocating conversation with John that Ethan reappeared. I had been dreading it, living in a state of constant, low-level anxiety, knowing deep down that he wouldn't stay away for long. The question wasn't if he would come back, but when and how. It happened on a Wednesday afternoon, midweek, the ordinary routine of the day providing a false sense of security. John was at work, of course. I had just finished cleaning the living room, vacuuming away the dust and the silence, and was about to head out to run errands, a desperate attempt to inject some normalcy into the unraveling fabric of my life, when I heard the familiar, dreaded knock at the front door. My heart sank like a stone in ice water. I knew who it was. I opened the door, bracing myself, and there he was, Ethan. Standing on my front porch, hands shoved deep in his pockets, face calm, almost eerily so, but his eyes, those dark, unsettling eyes, were stormy, turbulent, betraying the carefully constructed facade of composure. He looked different, colder. Something in him had shifted, hardened. The charming, slightly vulnerable young man I thought I knew, or thought I had known for years, seemed to have vanished, replaced by someone else entirely. "We need to talk," he said, his voice flat, devoid of inflection, a chilling monotone that sent a fresh wave of fear washing over me. I didn't want to let him in. Every instinct screamed at me to slam the door in his face, to run, to hide, but I knew, with a grim resignation, that I didn't have a choice. I couldn't have him standing on my front porch, shouting, arguing, creating a scene, not in this quiet, watchful neighborhood, not with the neighbors' curtains twitching. With a sigh of defeat, I stepped aside, opening the door wider, a silent, reluctant invitation. He walked past me into the house, the tension between us so thick, so suffocating, it felt like a physical weight pressing down on me, a suffocating blanket of dread. "I've told you," I began, trying desperately to keep my voice steady, to project an authority I didn't feel. "This is over, Ethan. Whatever you think we had, it's done." Ethan turned to face me, his jaw clenched tight, his eyes narrowed, burning with a cold, focused anger. "You think you can just throw me away like I'm nothing?" I swallowed hard, my hands trembling uncontrollably now, betraying my carefully constructed facade of strength. I didn't mean to hurt you, Ethan. But this was a mistake. You know that. A terrible, devastating mistake." "A mistake?" Ethan repeated, the word dripping with sarcasm, with a bitter, corrosive anger. That's all this was to you, Sarah. A mistake? I could feel the fear rising in my chest, constricting my throat, making it hard to breathe. My breath quickened, shallow, panicked. Please, Ethan, you need to leave. But Ethan wasn't listening. He took another step closer, his eyes darkening, the anger simmering, threatening to boil over. You think you can just use me and then walk away? Do you really think I'm going to let you do that? Panic surged through me, a tidal wave of ice-cold terror. I backed away, stumbling, my heart racing, pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. You need to leave now, Ethan. Ethan's face twisted into a cruel, mocking sneer. Or what, Sarah? You'll call John? Tell him what we did? My blood ran cold, freezing in my veins. Ethan had never been this aggressive before, never this openly threatening. I didn't know what to do. I felt trapped, cornered, suffocated. The walls of my own home, my sanctuary, were closing in on me, becoming a prison. I'm not playing games, Ethan, I said, my voice shaking, betraying my fear despite my desperate attempt at bravado. I want you to leave now. For a long, terrifying moment, he just stood there, motionless, his chest rising and falling with barely controlled anger, his eyes burning into mine. Then, without another word, without another sound, he turned abruptly, stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him with a force that rattled the windows in their frames. I collapsed onto the couch, my entire body trembling, shaking uncontrollably. I knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. Ethan was unpredictable, volatile, and I had no idea what he might do next, what he was capable of. But one thing was terrifyingly clear. I had to find a way to stop him, to stop this madness. Before everything, my entire life came crashing down around me in flames. The next few days were a blur of fear and suffocating anxiety. I was constantly on edge, jumpy, waiting for the other shoe to drop, the inevitable explosion. I knew Ethan wasn't going to give up easily, not after that chilling confrontation. Every time the phone rang, every time someone knocked at the door, every time I heard an unexpected sound, my heart leaped into my throat, fear spiking, adrenaline surging. Then, one evening, the call came. The call I had been dreading, the call I knew was inevitable. It was late. John was already asleep or pretending to be in the strained silence of our bedroom. I was in the kitchen, mindlessly finishing up the dishes, the clatter of plates, a poor attempt to drown out the deafening silence of the house. The silence between John and me, the silence of my own fear when my phone buzzed on the counter. I picked it up, my stomach twisting into a tight knot when I saw Ethan's name flashing on the screen. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, letting it ring, hoping he would give up, go away. But something told me that this was different. This was important. This was it. With trembling hands, I answered the call, pressing the phone to my ear, bracing myself for the inevitable. You think you're so clever, don't you? Ethan's voice was low, distorted, almost unrecognizable, but still undeniably his, dangerous, sending a shiver of pure terror down my spine. You think you can just ignore me, pretend like none of this ever happened? I swallowed hard, trying to steady my voice, to project some semblance of calm into the storm raging inside me. Ethan, please, you need to stop this. Yeah. I'm done playing nice, Sarah, he said, his voice hardening, becoming colder, more menacing. You don't get to walk away from me without consequences. What are you talking about? I asked, fear gripping me, tightening its hold. What consequences? You'll see soon enough, Sarah, Ethan replied, his tone dark, ominous, promising something terrible, something unavoidable. You're going to regret everything. Before I could respond, before I could even formulate a question, he hung up, the line going dead, leaving me standing there in stunned, terrified silence, the dial tone buzzing in my ear like a death knell. My hand shook violently as I placed the phone back on the counter, the cold plastic slick against my clammy skin. What was Ethan planning? What did he mean by consequences? The fear that had been gnawing at me for days suddenly intensified, amplified, becoming a suffocating, paralyzing terror. I knew Ethan was unstable, erratic, capable of anything, but I hadn't realized, hadn't truly understood, just how dangerous he could be. And now, standing alone in the quiet kitchen, the darkness pressing in from all sides, I was terrified. Terrified of what he might do. I didn't sleep that night. Sleep was impossible. Every creak of the old house, every rustle of leaves outside the window, every distant siren wail in the city made me jump, my heart racing with a primal, instinctive fear. I knew I had to do something, but I didn't know what. If I told John the truth, the whole truth about Ethan, about everything, it would destroy us, destroy everything we had left. But if I didn't do something, if I didn't stop Ethan, I had no idea what he might do next, what terrible consequences he had in store. The next morning, I woke before dawn, the weight of fear pressing down on me, suffocating me. But with the fear came a flicker of resolve, a desperate last-ditch attempt at control. I made a decision. I couldn't keep living in this suffocating fear, this constant state of anxiety. I had to tell John the truth. The whole, ugly, devastating truth, no matter what the consequences were. I couldn't let Ethan continue to hold this over me, to manipulate me, to threaten my life, my marriage, my sanity. It was time to come clean, to face the music, to accept whatever destruction I had unleashed. But before I had a chance to sit John down, to confess everything, to finally shatter the fragile remnants of our life, something happened, something unexpected, something that changed everything, irrevocably. I was at home, alone as usual, preparing a meager lunch, forcing myself to eat something, anything, when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. A jolt of apprehension shot through me. My heart pounded in my chest, a frantic drumbeat of fear. I approached the door cautiously, peering through the peephole, my breath hitched. Standing on my front porch, bathed in the harsh afternoon sunlight, was a police officer. Uniformed, serious-faced, official. Mrs. Williams? The officer asked, his expression grave, unsmiling. Is that you? Yes, I replied, my voice trembling, barely audible. Yes, that's me. Is something wrong, officer? The officer hesitated for a moment, his gaze somber before answering, his words chilling me to the bone. I'm afraid there's been an incident, Mrs. Williams, he said, his tone grave, heavy with unspoken implications. We need you to come down to the station with me. Panic surged through me, a tidal wave of ice-cold terror. An incident? What kind of incident? The officer hesitated again, a brief pregnant pause before delivering the devastating blow. It's about Ethan, Mrs. Williams. I sat in the small, sterile, cold room at the police station, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, casting harsh shadows on the bare walls. My hands were clasped tightly in my lap, knuckles white, bloodless. My mind was racing, a chaotic whirlwind of fear, guilt, confusion, trying desperately to make sense of everything. What had happened to Ethan? Why were the police involved? Why me? The door creaked open, interrupting my panicked thoughts, and a detective walked in. Detective O'Malley, his nameplate read. His expression was serious, professional, unreadable. He sat down across from me, placing a thin manila folder on the table between us, the sound strangely loud in the oppressive silence of the room. Mrs. Williams, he began, his voice calm, measured, but firm. We've been investigating a situation involving your nephew, Ethan Miller. I swallowed hard, my heart pounding in my chest, a frantic, desperate rhythm. What kind of situation, detective? Detective O'Malley sighed, a weary, world-worn sound, leaning forward slightly, his gaze intense, unwavering. Ethan has been missing for the past 48 hours, Mrs. Williams. His car was found abandoned at the edge of town near the old quarry, and we've been unable to locate him. My blood ran cold, turning to ice in my veins. Missing? Ethan was missing? It couldn't be. It wasn't possible. Missing? I stammered, the word barely a whisper, my mind spinning, refusing to grasp the enormity of the situation. I don't understand. He was just at my house a few days ago. Detective O'Malley nodded slowly, his eyes sharp, assessing, watching my every reaction. That's what we've been told, Mrs. Williams. We have reason to believe that Ethan's disappearance may be connected to a personal conflict. Can you tell me anything, Mrs. Williams, about your recent interactions with him? Panic surged through me, a suffocating wave. I couldn't tell Detective O'Malley the truth, not the whole truth, not about the affair, not about the threats Ethan had made. But I also knew, with a chilling certainty, that if I lied, if I tried to conceal anything, it could make things infinitely worse. For me, for John, for everyone. I don't know, I whispered, my voice shaky, barely audible, another pathetic, transparent lie. He's been acting strange lately, distant, agitated. He seemed angry. Detective O'Malley's eyes narrowed, his gaze sharpening, dissecting my carefully chosen words. Angry, Mrs. Williams? Angry about what exactly? I hesitated, my mind racing, frantically searching for a way to explain, to deflect, to minimize, without revealing the devastating truth, the poisonous secret that threatened to consume everything. I'm not sure, Detective, I stammered, another lie, another pathetic attempt at evasion. He wasn't himself. Something was bothering him, but he didn't say. Detective O'Malley leaned back in his chair, his gaze unwavering, studying me for a long, silent moment, his expression unreadable. Then he spoke again, his voice calm, measured, but laced with a subtle undercurrent of suspicion. "Mrs. Williams," he said, his eyes piercing me, seeing through the flimsy facade of denial. "Is there something you're not telling us? We need to know everything, Mrs. Williams. Everything if we're going to find Ethan." Tears welled up in my eyes, hot, stinging, blurring my vision. I shook my head, a small, defeated movement, the weight of my lies crushing me, suffocating me. "I don't know where he is, Detective," I whispered, my voice breaking, choked with unshed tears. "I swear to you, I don't know what happened to him." Detective O'Malley nodded slowly, deliberately, but I could tell, with chilling certainty, that he wasn't convinced, not even for a moment. "All right, Mrs. Williams," he said, standing up from the table, his movements deliberate, controlled, official. "If you think of anything else, anything at all, no matter how insignificant it may seem, please contact us immediately." He handed me a business card, the crisp, white card feeling cold and impersonal in my trembling hand. I nodded, numb, silent, my heart heavy with guilt, fear, and a dawning sense of utter, irreversible disaster. Ethan was missing, and I had no idea where he was or what had happened to him. But one thing was terrifyingly clear. Whatever had happened, whatever was happening, it was far from over. After the police left, after the sterile chill of the interrogation room faded, replaced by the equally chilling silence of my own kitchen, I sat at the table, staring blankly at the empty space in front of me, the detective's words echoing in my mind, a relentless accusatory loop. My mind was a whirlpool of fear, guilt, and suffocating confusion. Ethan was missing, and the police were already suspicious. They knew something was wrong, something more than just a simple disappearance. And sooner or later, inevitably, the truth would surface, would explode, would shatter everything. I had no idea where Ethan had gone, or what had happened to him, but his chilling threats, his promises of consequences, echoed in my mind, a terrifying, inescapable refrain. He had promised retribution, and now he had vanished. I had to tell John the truth, the whole devastating, soul-crushing truth. There was no more time for lies, no more room for denial, no more pretending that everything was fine, that life could somehow return to normal. The weight of my lies, the suffocating burden of my betrayal had become too much to bear. And with Ethan missing, with the police investigation looming, it was only a matter of time, a terrifyingly short amount of time, before the carefully constructed facade of my life crumbled completely, revealing the rotten core of my secrets. I couldn't keep running from the truth any longer. It was time to face the music, time to confess, time to prepare for the inevitable fallout. That evening, after John returned home from work, his face etched with a weariness that went beyond mere exhaustion, I sat him down in the living room. My hands trembled as I wrung them together, twisting my fingers, searching desperately for the words, the right words, the least devastating words, to explain what I had done, to confess my betrayal. He looked at me with a mixture of concern and suspicion, sensing the heavy tension in the air, the unspoken dread that hung between us like a shroud. "Sarah, what's going on?" John asked, his voice gentle, but with an undercurrent of steel, firm, demanding an answer. "You've been acting strange, Sarah, for weeks now. You're scaring me." Tears welled up in my eyes again, hot, stinging, blurring my vision. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, a frantic, desperate rhythm. This was it. The point of no return. There was no turning back now. "I need to tell you something, John," I whispered, my voice shaking, barely audible, the words catching in my throat. And it's not going to be easy to hear." John's expression shifted, the concern deepening, worry creasing his brow as he sat forward, leaning in, his eyes fixed on mine, unwavering, demanding the truth. "What is it, Sarah? Just tell me." I took a deep, shuddering breath, my chest tightening with a crushing weight of guilt. "It's about Ethan," I began, my voice barely audible, the words like shards of glass scraping against my raw throat. Something happened between us, John, and I didn't mean for it to. I swear to God I didn't. But but we crossed a line. John's face twisted in confusion, disbelief, a dawning horror slowly spreading across his features. For a long, agonizing moment, he just stared at me, his eyes wide, uncomprehending, struggling to process the impossible words. Then slowly, painfully, realization dawned, the devastating truth sinking in, shattering his carefully constructed world. His eyes widened, his face paling, and he stood abruptly, pushing himself up from the couch, pacing the room in disbelief, his movements jerky, agitated like a caged animal. "What are you saying, Sarah?" he asked, his voice cracking, breaking, a raw, wounded sound, a mixture of anger, shock, and a profound, soul-deep pain flooding his words, his entire being. What are you actually saying?" "I'm so sorry, John," I cried, the dam finally breaking, tears streaming down my face, hot, uncontrollable. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. It was a mistake, a terrible, awful mistake. I know I hurt you, John, and I'm so, so sorry." For a long, agonizing moment, John just stood there, frozen, staring at me in stunned silence, his face a mask of disbelief, betrayal, and a raw, visceral pain that ripped through me like a knife. Then, slowly, deliberately, he shook his head, a small, disbelieving movement, his face flushing crimson with a sudden surge of anger, of rage. You were with him?" he whispered, his voice hoarse, choked with emotion. "My own nephew, Sarah? Ethan? How could you do this to me? To us?" Tears streamed down my face, hot, unchecked, as I stood up, reaching out for him, a desperate, futile attempt at comfort, at connection, at forgiveness. "I'm sorry, John," I sobbed, my voice trembling, pleading. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I never wanted to hurt you." John backed away from me, flinching as if burned, his expression a devastating mixture of pain, betrayal, and a profound, soul-deep disgust. "How long, Sarah?" he asked, his voice low, dangerous, barely controlled. "How long has this been going on?" "Not long," I whispered. Another lie, another pathetic attempt at minimizing the damage, at lessening the unbearable weight of my betrayal. It wasn't like that, John. It was just a mistake. A terrible, isolated mistake." "A mistake?" he shouted, his voice rising in a sudden surge of raw anger, of wounded fury, echoing in the suddenly silent living room. You think you can just call this a mistake, Sarah? You've destroyed everything, Sarah. Everything we built, everything we had." I flinched at the raw pain in his voice, the devastating weight of his words, my heart breaking for the man I had betrayed, for the life I had shattered. I had never seen him like this, never witnessed such raw, unleashed emotion. And the guilt, the crushing, suffocating guilt threatened to drown me. But there was more I had to tell him, more devastating truths to unleash. "John," I said, my voice shaky, barely audible above the pounding of my heart, the roaring in my ears. "John, there's something else, about Ethan." John stopped pacing abruptly, freezing in place, his eyes narrowing, his gaze suddenly sharp, focused, wary as he stared at me, waiting, dreading the next devastating revelation. "What?" he asked, his voice flat, cold, devoid of emotion, resigned to the inevitable. "What else could there possibly be, Sarah?" Ethan is missing, John." John stood frozen, unmoving, for a long, silent moment, his eyes narrowed, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, deliberately, realization dawned, the full weight of my words sinking in, another devastating blow in the relentless onslaught of bad news. "Missing?" he repeated, the word hanging in the air between us, heavy with unspoken implications. What do you mean, Sarah? What do you mean Ethan is missing?" "The police came by today," I explained, my voice trembling, wiping the fresh tears from my face, the tears that seemed to flow endlessly now, a constant stream of guilt and remorse. They said his car was found abandoned, and they haven't been able to find him. He's been missing for 48 hours, John." John's face drained of color, becoming ashen, gray. For a moment, he swayed, unsteady on his feet, looking like he might actually collapse under the weight of the devastating news. He sank back onto the couch, heavily, burying his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "Oh God, Sarah," he moaned, his voice muffled, broken. "Oh God, what have you done?" "I don't know, John," I whispered, my voice breaking, tears streaming down my face again, unchecked, uncontrollable. "I don't know what happened to him. But but he made threats, John. Before he disappeared, he threatened me. I think something's terribly wrong. For a long, agonizing moment, John didn't say anything. He just sat there, slumped on the couch, his body trembling, racked with silent sobs, trying to process the impossible, devastating reality. I stood there frozen, watching him, unsure of what to do, what to say. I had shattered his world, shattered our life, and there was no way to fix it, no way to undo the damage. Finally, slowly, John looked up, his eyes red-rimmed, swollen with tears, his face a mask of pain, sadness, and a deep underlying fear. "We need to go to the police, Sarah," he said, his voice quiet, resigned but firm. "We need to tell them everything." The following morning, we went to the police station, John and I, a broken couple, united only by the shared devastation of my betrayal, the looming shadow of Ethan's disappearance. I had barely slept, the night a restless torment of guilt, fear, and fragmented nightmares. My mind raced endlessly, replaying every moment with Ethan, every lie I had told, every devastating choice I had made, the possibilities of what had happened to him swirling in my head, a terrifying, inescapable vortex. The fear of what the police might think, of how everything would play out, gnawed at me, a relentless, visceral dread. But I knew John was right. We couldn't keep this to ourselves any longer. Not anymore. Not now. When we arrived at the station, the sterile, impersonal atmosphere amplified my anxiety, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, casting harsh shadows, the silence oppressive, heavy with unspoken accusations. We were met by Detective O'Malley, the same detective who had come to my house the day before, his expression even more serious now, more somber, more unreadable. He led us into the same small, windowless interrogation room, the walls stark bare, the tension in the air so thick, so suffocating, it felt like a physical weight pressing down on me. "You said you had more information about Ethan's disappearance, Mrs. Williams?" Detective O'Malley asked, his tone measured, professional, as he sat down across from us, placing a fresh notepad and pen on the table, ready to record every devastating word. I took a deep breath, my hands trembling uncontrollably as I glanced at John, sitting beside me, his face pale, drawn, but his gaze steady, unwavering, nodding slightly, a silent encouragement, a grim acceptance of the inevitable. "I need to be honest with you, Detective," I began, my voice shaky, barely audible, the words catching in my throat, the confession tasting like ash in my mouth. There's something I didn't tell you yesterday, about Ethan and me, about us. Ethan and I, we were involved in something inappropriate. It was out now. The poisonous secret, finally spoken aloud, hanging in the air between us, a palpable stain. It started a few weeks ago, I continued, my voice trembling, barely a whisper, the shame burning in my cheeks, a physical manifestation of my guilt. And I ended it, but he didn't take it well. Detective O'Malley raised an eyebrow, his expression unreadable, his gaze sharp, dissecting my every word, every hesitation, every subtle shift in my body language. "Involved, Mrs. Williams?" he asked, his voice calm, measured, but laced with a subtle undercurrent of suspicion. "Involved how, exactly?" I swallowed hard, the words catching in my throat, choking me. The truth, the full, devastating truth, was a bitter pill to swallow, a poison I had to force myself to ingest. We had an affair, Detective." The room seemed to grow colder, the silence amplifying the weight of my confession. I could feel John stiffen beside me, his body rigid with pain, betrayal, and a renewed wave of anger, but he remained silent, his gaze fixed straight ahead, his face a mask of stoic grief. Detective O'Malley didn't react outwardly, his expression remaining impassive, professional, but I could see the gears turning in his mind, the pieces of the puzzle beginning to click into place, the implications of my confession sinking in. "And when you ended it, Mrs. Williams," he asked, his voice still calm but with a new edge of intensity, a sharper focus. "What happened then? After you told him it was over?" He got angry, I admitted, my hands wringing together, twisting, pulling, a nervous, self-destructive habit. He made threats, Detective. He said there would be consequences if I tried to walk away from him. Detective O'Malley nodded slowly, deliberately, leaning back in his chair, his gaze unwavering, studying me intently, assessing the truth, the lies, the unspoken emotions swirling beneath the surface of my confession. "And when was the last time you saw him, Mrs. Williams?" he asked, his voice calm, but with a subtle shift in tone, a hint of urgency now. 4 days ago, I replied, my voice barely above a whisper, the memory of that last terrifying encounter with Ethan flashing through my mind, vivid, chilling. He came to the house. He was upset, angry, but he left. I haven't seen him or heard from him since then. Detective O'Malley was silent for a long, agonizing moment, his eyes fixed on me, piercing, probing as he processed everything, weighing the truth against the lies, the known against the unknown. Then, finally, he stood up, gesturing for us to remain seated, his movements abrupt, official. "I'll be right back," he said, his voice clipped, professional, and left the room, the door clicking shut behind him, leaving John and me alone in the oppressive silence, trapped in the suffocating atmosphere of guilt and fear. John and I sat in silence, side by side, yet miles apart, the weight of everything pressing down on us, crushing us. I could feel his anger simmering just beneath the surface, a volatile, dangerous undercurrent, but for now, he kept it in check, a fragile truce in the face of a greater, more immediate threat. We were in too deep now. There was no turning back, no escaping the consequences of my actions. After what felt like an eternity, Detective O'Malley returned, carrying a thin file in his hand, the manila folder looking ominously official in the sterile light of the interrogation room. He placed the file on the table in front of us, opening it deliberately, revealing a series of photographs. My heart skipped a beat, a sudden, sharp lurch of fear when I saw what was inside. Crime scene photos, stark, graphic, unsettling. The photographs showed a wooded area, dense trees casting long shadows, police tape strung between the branches, a stark yellow barrier against the encroaching darkness, and in the center of it all, surrounded by yellow tape, Darren's abandoned car. My stomach churned, nausea rising in my throat, dread pooling in my gut, a cold, heavy weight. "We found his car here, Mrs. Williams," Detective O'Malley said, his voice flat, emotionless, pointing to one of the photographs, a close-up shot of Ethan's familiar silver sedan sitting incongruously amidst the tangled undergrowth of the woods. "Near the old quarry, just like we thought, but there's been no sign of him, Mrs. Williams. No trace of Ethan anywhere. No indication of foul play, not yet. But we're still investigating, of course." And I swallowed hard, my mind racing, a chaotic jumble of terrifying possibilities. Do you think something happened to him, Detective?" I whispered, my voice barely audible, the question hanging in the air, heavy with dread. "Do you think he's—" "We're exploring all options, Mrs. Williams," Detective O'Malley replied, his expression serious, unrevealing, professional. "But given the nature of your relationship with Ethan, Mrs. Williams, we're going to need to take a closer look at everything." My heart sank. I knew what that meant. The police were going to investigate. Everything, every aspect of my life, every detail of my relationship with Ethan, every corner of my past, my present, my future. And if they dug deep enough, if they uncovered the truth, the whole, ugly, devastating truth, well, I didn't want to think about that. The consequences were too terrifying to contemplate. "I'll be honest with you, Mrs. Williams," Detective O'Malley said, his voice hardening, becoming sharper, his eyes narrowing, his gaze piercing, accusatory. "People don't just disappear without a trace, Mrs. Williams. Not in this day and age, not without leaving some kind of explanation. If there's something you're not telling us, Mrs. Williams, something you're still holding back, now is the time to come clean. Now is the time to tell us the truth." "I've told you everything, Detective," I whispered, my voice shaking, tears welling up in my eyes again, a constant, relentless stream of guilt and fear. "I swear to you, Detective, I've told you everything I know." For a long, silent moment, Detective O'Malley just stared at me, his gaze unwavering, dissecting my soul, searching for any flicker of deception, any hint of a lie. Then, finally, he closed the file with a sharp, decisive snap, the sound echoing in the oppressive silence of the room, and stood up, his movements abrupt, official, final. "We'll be in touch, Mrs. Williams," he said, his voice clipped, professional, dismissing us. "In the meantime, I suggest you both stay close to home and cooperate fully with our investigation. That would be advisable." John and I left the station in silence, the weight of what had just happened, what had been said, what had been left unsaid, hanging between us, a suffocating cloud of fear and uncertainty. I had told the police the truth, or at least part of it. the part that implicated me, that exposed my betrayal, my shame, my guilt. But there was so much more I hadn't said, so much more I didn't understand. Where was Ethan? What had really happened to him? And more importantly, more terrifyingly, what was going to happen to me? The next few days crawled by, each hour an eternity, a blur of anxiety, fear, and endless waiting. I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen, that Ethan's disappearance was only the beginning, the opening act in a much larger, much darker nightmare. The police continued their investigation, their presence a constant, unsettling reminder of the precariousness of my situation. But there were no new leads, no breakthroughs, no signs of where Ethan had gone, no clues to explain his sudden, inexplicable vanishing act. It was as if he had simply vanished into thin air, swallowed by the darkness, leaving behind only questions, fear, and a suffocating silence. John barely spoke to me. Since my devastating confession, he had retreated into himself, building an invisible wall between us, a barrier of pain, anger, and profound, soul-deep betrayal. He was distant, withdrawn, his eyes cold, accusing, and I couldn't blame him. I had shattered his trust, shattered our marriage, and I wasn't sure, with a growing sense of despair, if we would ever recover, if we could ever rebuild the broken pieces of our life. Every time I looked at him, I saw the pain reflected in his eyes, the raw, unhealed wound of my betrayal, and it was more than I could bear, more than I could endure. The guilt weighed on me like a lead blanket, heavy, suffocating, crushing my spirit. I had caused this. My reckless actions, my selfish desires had set off a chain of events that I couldn't control, a domino effect of destruction that had led to Ethan's disappearance, to John's pain, to the unraveling of my entire life. And now, Ethan was missing, possibly hurt, possibly worse, and the police were circling closer, their investigation tightening its grip, and I felt trapped, utterly trapped, in my own life, suffocated by the devastating consequences of my mistakes. Then, one night, everything came to a head. The inevitable confrontation, the final reckoning. It was late. The house was quiet, shrouded in darkness. I was sitting alone in the living room, staring blankly at the flickering television screen, the mindless noise a poor substitute for human connection, a futile attempt to drown out the deafening silence of my own thoughts, when I heard a noise outside, a faint scratching sound, like branches scraping against the side of the house. My heart leaped in my chest, a sudden jolt of fear, and I quickly stood up, my pulse racing, adrenaline surging through my veins. I peered cautiously out the window, straining my eyes in the darkness, but I couldn't see anything. Only shadows, and the rustling leaves of the trees swaying in the night breeze. But then the noise came again, closer this time, more distinct. A faint rustling, like someone moving through the bushes just outside the window. Fear gripped me, a cold, paralyzing dread. I moved slowly, cautiously toward the front door, my hand shaking as I reached for the knob. I knew I should wake John, should call the police, should do something, anything to protect myself, to protect us. But something inside me, a morbid curiosity, a terrifying premonition, a fatalistic acceptance of the inevitable, told me to investigate on my own. I had to know. I had to face whoever was out there in the darkness. I opened the door cautiously, slowly, inch by inch, stepping out onto the porch, the cool night air raising goosebumps on my skin. A chill that went deeper than the temperature, a cold premonition of terror. The night was eerily silent, the only sounds the chirping of crickets, the distant hum of traffic, and the frantic pounding of my own heart in my ears. I scanned the yard, my heart pounding, adrenaline coursing through my veins, every sense on high alert. And then I saw him. Ethan. He was standing at the edge of the yard, just beyond the reach of the porch light, shrouded in shadows, a dark, menacing figure lurking in the darkness. His face was obscured by the shadows, but I knew it was him. I could feel it. A cold, visceral certainty. My blood turned to ice in my veins as I stared at him, unable to speak, paralyzed by fear, by a terrifying, gut-wrenching dread. "Ethan?" I whispered, my voice trembling, barely audible above the frantic pounding of my heart. He didn't move. He just stood there, motionless, silent, watching me from the darkness, his presence a palpable threat, a silent promise of violence, of retribution, of devastating consequences. "What are you doing here, Ethan?" I asked, my voice racing, a desperate attempt at bravado masking the terror that threatened to overwhelm me. "The police are looking for you, Ethan. Where have you been? Where have you been hiding?" For a long, agonizing moment, there was only silence. the oppressive silence of the night broken only by the frantic chirping of crickets, the distant hum of the city, the frantic pounding of my heart. Then, slowly, deliberately, Ethan stepped forward, emerging from the shadows, his face coming into view, illuminated by the dim porch light. His eyes were dark, cold, devoid of warmth, and filled with something else, something I couldn't quite place, something unhinged. "You didn't think I'd disappear that easily, did you, Sarah?" he said, his voice low, menacing, a chilling whisper that cut through the silence of the night, sending a fresh wave of terror washing over me. Fear surged through me, a tidal wave of ice-cold terror, and I took a step back, stumbling, retreating toward the safety of the house, my mind spinning, desperately searching for an escape, for a way out of this nightmare. This wasn't the Ethan I knew. This was someone else entirely. Something had changed in him, something broken, something dangerous, something feral. "What do you want, Ethan?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, trembling with fear, desperation, and a dawning realization of the terrible danger I was in. Ethan smiled, but there was no warmth in it, no hint of the charming, vulnerable young man I thought I had known. It was a cold, cruel smile, a chilling, predatory grin that sent shivers down my spine. "I told you, Sarah," he said, his voice soft, but laced with a dangerous undercurrent of menace. "I told you there would be consequences. And now it's time to pay." I stood frozen on the porch, paralyzed by fear, staring at Ethan, the shadows playing across his face, distorting his features, making him seem even more menacing, more threatening, more unrecognizable. My heart pounded in my chest, a frantic, desperate rhythm, every instinct in my body screaming at me to run, to scream, to call for John, to do something, anything, to escape this terrifying nightmare. But I couldn't move. I was trapped, both by my fear and by the crushing weight of guilt, the inescapable knowledge that I had brought this all upon myself. Ethan took another step forward, closing the distance between us, his eyes locked on mine, unwavering, predatory. He was so close now that I could see the tension in his jaw, the anger simmering just beneath the surface, the cold, hard glint in his eyes. This wasn't the Ethan I had known. This was someone else entirely. Someone dangerous, someone broken. "You didn't think you could just get rid of me that easily, did you, Sarah?" Ethan said, his voice low, menacing, a chilling whisper that sent shivers down my spine. I swallowed hard, my throat dry, constricted with fear. "Ethan, please," I pleaded, my voice barely audible, trembling with desperation. "This isn't right, Ethan. You need to stop this. You need to go. You need to go to the police. They're looking for you, Ethan. You're in trouble." He let out a bitter, hollow laugh, shaking his head slowly, dismissively, his eyes gleaming with something dark, something unhinged. "The police?" he scoffed, his voice laced with contempt, with a chilling disregard for the law, for consequences. "You think I care about the police, Sarah? You think they scare me?" He took another step closer, his face inches from mine now, his breath cold against my skin. "They won't find anything, Sarah, because there's nothing to find. I've been careful." My blood ran cold, freezing in my veins. "Careful?" I whispered, my voice barely above a breath, my mind reeling, trying to grasp the terrifying implications of his words. "Careful about what, Ethan? What are you talking about?" Ethan's eyes gleamed with a dark, unsettling light, something manic, something unhinged. A cruel, chilling smile spread across his lips, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. A smile that promised pain, retribution, unspeakable horrors. "I told you, Sarah," he whispered, his voice dangerously calm, dangerously soft. "I told you there would be consequences. You thought you could use me, toss me aside, and go back to your perfect little life with John. But it doesn't work that way, Sarah. You don't get to walk away from me, Sarah, not after what we had." "We didn't have anything, Ethan," I said, my voice breaking, tears welling up in my eyes again, hot, stinging, the guilt aching in my chest, a physical pain. As the words left my mouth, I knew, with a terrifying certainty, that they were the wrong words, the words that would push him over the edge, the words that would unleash the darkness simmering within him. "It was a mistake, Ethan," I pleaded, my voice cracking, desperate. "A terrible, awful mistake. Please, Ethan, just let it go. Please, you have to let this go." Ethan shook his head slowly, deliberately, his jaw clenched tight, his eyes burning into mine with a chilling intensity. "Move on," he repeated, his voice rising slightly, a hint of anger creeping into his dangerously calm tone. You think You think I can just forget everything, Sarah? Forget everything that happened between us? Forget what we had? We didn't have anything, I insisted, my voice breaking, tears streaming down my face, unchecked, uncontrollable. It was a mistake, Ethan. A terrible, devastating mistake. For a long, agonizing moment, Ethan just stood there, motionless, silent, his face twisted with a volatile mix of pain, fury, and something else, something darker, something more sinister. Then, suddenly, his expression shifted, his eyes narrowed, and a cold, calculating smile spread across his lips, a smile that sent a fresh wave of terror washing over me. You think you can just erase me from your life, Sarah? He said, his voice dangerously calm again, dangerously soft, but laced with a chilling undercurrent of menace. Well, I've got news for you, Sarah. I'm not going anywhere. Not anymore. Not until you've paid for what you did to me. My heart lurched, a sudden, sharp pain, panic surging through me, a tidal wave of ice-cold terror. What are you going to do, Ethan? I whispered, my voice trembling, barely audible, the question hanging in the air between us, heavy with dread. Ethan took another step closer, his face inches from mine, his breath warm on my face, his eyes burning into my soul. Now you'll see, Sarah, he whispered, his voice like ice, like death. Now you'll finally see. Just then, the sound of a door creaking behind me, the soft click of the front door latch being released, made my heart leap into my throat, a sudden jolt of hope, of desperate relief. I turned sharply, my breath catching in my throat. To see John standing in the doorway, his face pale, drawn, his eyes wide with confusion, disbelief, and a raw, untamed anger. He had heard everything, every devastating word. Martin, I began, my voice trembling, a desperate plea for help, for salvation. But before I could say another word, before I could even breathe, Ethan lunged forward, his movements lightning fast, unexpected, brutal, grabbing my arm with a vice-like grip, yanking me toward him, pulling me away from the fragile safety of the porch, into the darkness, into the waiting shadows. I let out a startled cry, a choked scream, trying to pull away, to break free, but his grip was like iron, unyielding, inescapable. "Ethan, let her go!" John shouted, his voice raw with rage, with fear, with a desperate protectiveness. He stepped forward, moving quickly, his face flushed crimson with anger, his fists clenched tight, ready to fight, to protect me, to defend our shattered life. Ethan tightened his grip on my arm, his eyes wild, manic, unhinged. "Stay back, John," he snarled, his voice low, dangerous, menacing. "This doesn't concern you. This is between Sarah and me." "The hell it doesn't!" John growled, his voice a low, threatening rumble, his eyes burning with fury. He took another step forward, closing the distance, ready to confront Ethan, to fight for me, for us. "Let her go, Ethan, now, or I swear to God Or you'll what, John?" Ethan interrupted, his voice mocking, cruel, dismissive, a chilling sneer twisting his lips. "You think you can just walk in here and play the hero now, John, after everything she's done, after everything she's put you through?" John's eyes flickered with a visible flash of pain, of raw, wounded emotion, but he didn't back down. He stood his ground, his gaze unwavering, fixed on Ethan, his body tense, ready for violence. "Let her go, Ethan," he repeated, his voice firm, resolute, but with a hint of pleading now, a desperate attempt to reason with the unreasoning. "This isn't the way, Ethan. Just let her go." For a long, terrifying moment, it seemed like Ethan might explode, might unleash the violence simmering within him. His entire body was rigid with tension, his grip on my arm painfully tight, bruising, cutting off the circulation. But then, something in his expression shifted, something flickered, something broke. He let out a bitter, hollow laugh, shaking his head slowly, dismissively, his grip on my arm loosening, just enough for me to pull free, to stumble back, away from him, toward the fragile safety of John's protection. "You don't get it, do you, John?" Ethan said, his voice shaking, a mixture of anger, pain, and a desperate, unsettling vulnerability. He took a step back, away from us, his eyes darting between John and me, his gaze wild, unfocused, lost. You think this is about you, John? You think she's really sorry for what she did? Sorry for hurting you? She's not, John. She's just like all the others. She used me, John. She lied to me, and now she wants to pretend like none of it ever happened. Like I'm nothing. John stepped in front of me, shielding me from Ethan's gaze, his body a protective barrier between us. "You need help, Ethan," John said, his voice quiet, surprisingly calm, surprisingly gentle, considering the raw emotion raging beneath the surface. "You need to walk away from this, Ethan. You need to get help." Ethan stared at him for a long, silent moment, his chest heaving with barely controlled anger, his eyes filled with a mixture of pain, confusion, and a desperate, unfulfilled need. Then, without another word, without another sound, he turned abruptly and stormed off into the darkness, disappearing into the night, swallowed by the shadows, leaving us standing alone on the porch, trembling, shaken, utterly broken. For a long, agonizing moment, there was only silence. The oppressive silence of the night broken only by our ragged breathing, the distant hum of the city, the frantic pounding of my heart. I stood there trembling, leaning heavily against John, unable to believe what had just happened, unable to process the terrifying reality of the situation, the narrow escape, the lingering threat. John turned to me slowly, his face a mask of pain, hurt, confusion, and a deep, soul-wrenching betrayal. "Is it true, Sarah?" he asked, his voice quiet, barely audible, the question hanging in the air between us, heavy with unspoken accusations, with devastating implications. Did you use him, Sarah? Did you just use him?" I swallowed hard, my throat tight with guilt, shame, and a profound, soul-crushing remorse. "I didn't mean to, John," I whispered, my voice breaking, barely audible, the words lost in the darkness of the night, swallowed by the silence of our shattered lives. "I swear to you, John, I didn't mean for any of this to happen." John's face twisted with pain, a silent scream of anguish, and for a moment I thought he might walk away too, might leave me standing alone on the porch, abandoned, broken, utterly and completely alone. But instead, slowly, deliberately, he turned and walked back inside the house, leaving me standing on the porch alone in the darkness with the crushing weight of my mistakes, my lies, my betrayal, and the terrifying, inescapable knowledge that this story, our story, was far from over. Months have passed since Ethan disappeared, vanished into the shadows, leaving behind only a trail of unanswered questions, unresolved fear, and the shattered remnants of my life. But the scars he left behind, the deep, gaping wounds in my marriage, in my soul, remain raw, unhealed, a constant, throbbing reminder of my devastating choices. John and I are still together, technically. We still share a house, a bed, a life, on the surface. But our marriage is fractured, broken beyond repair, held together by a fragile, fraying thread of unresolved tension, unspoken accusations, and a profound, suffocating silence. We don't talk about Ethan. We don't talk about what happened. The words remain unspoken, trapped in the suffocating silence between us, but his presence, his ghost, lingers in the air, a constant, unsettling reminder of my betrayal, of our broken trust, of the life we have lost, the life we can never reclaim. I live in constant fear, a low-level hum of anxiety that never truly fades, never truly disappears. I live in constant fear that Ethan will return, that he's still out there, watching, waiting, biding his time, planning his revenge, plotting his return. I check the mail every day, my heart pounding in my chest, half expecting another letter, another anonymous white envelope. Another chilling reminder that he's still out there, somewhere in the darkness, waiting for his chance to strike, to finish what he started, to unleash the final, devastating consequences. I don't know where he is. I don't know what he's planning, but I know, with a chilling certainty, that I'll never truly be free of him. Not ever. I made a mistake. A terrible, devastating mistake, and now I'm paying the price. Every single day. My life will never be the same. The innocence is gone. The trust is shattered. The joy has withered and died, replaced by a constant, gnawing guilt that will never go away, a shadow that will forever darken every corner of my existence. Ethan was right about one thing. There are consequences for every action, and I am living mine every single day. As I sit here, staring out the window at the quiet, ordinary street outside, the mundane normalcy a stark contrast to the chaos and fear churning within me, I can't help but wonder if this is how it will always be. Will I spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, waiting for the past to catch up with me, waiting for Ethan to reappear, to unleash his final, devastating revenge? Or will he finally disappear for good, vanish completely, leaving me to pick up the shattered pieces of the life I have so carelessly, so irrevocably destroyed? Only time will tell. But one thing is certain, etched into my soul, burned into my memory. I will never forget the choices I made, the lies I told, the betrayal that changed everything. And as much as I desperately want to believe that the worst is over, that the nightmare is finally fading, I know, deep down, with a chilling, visceral certainty, that this story is far from finished, far from over.